let me look at ancient wars between the Holy Spirit and the Hamas spirit. Isaac, father of the Jews, conflict with Ishmael, father of the Arabs, 3,800 years ago, Genesis 16 through 21. In the days of Judges, and we will be in Judges 6, 7, and 8, verse by verse, starting next week. This is my introduction because I have too much to share. But in Judges, it's the Jewish people versus the surrounding nations. And it is 300 years of war, about 3,000 years ago, recorded in the book of Judges. Many of the nations that they're fighting against. Deborah leads a war. We looked at that. Gideon leads a war. We will look at that. And Samson goes to war all by himself. We'll look at that at the end. But the Arab nations who are at war against Israel in the book of Judges, they descend from Ishmael, Abraham's son, through his second wife, Hagar. The other nations descend from Midian. That's Abraham's son through his third wife, Keturah. So he married Sarah and then Hagar. He cast out Hagar. Sarah died. He married Keturah. His two sons, who are not the covenant promised sons, they become the tribes that become the nations that surround Israel, attack and invade it. That's why 9 times in the book of Judges, it mentions the Midianites, and 22 times it says Midian. For those who are Hebrew, they would have realized that's the other side of the family. And if you've got a broken, dysfunctional, conflicted family, this is a family at war that leads to nations at war. This leads to Gideon and the Jews against the Ishmaelites and the Arabs. You'll see that war in Judges 6 through 8, 3,000 years ago. And Judges 8:24, when we get to the battle of Gideon, it says that they were fighting against, quote, the Ishmaelites from Abraham and his second wife Hagar. So you still with me? Okay, it's a lot, right? Let me go deeper. So I was sitting in my house and I was working on the sermon. This was many months ago. This was actually before the war in Israel. I didn't know that the war in Judges would be playing out today. This is God's prophetic timing. So I'm working on Gideon, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know a lot about the book of Judges. I'll just be honest with you. I still don't know a lot about Leviticus. So there's still parts I'm working on, right? Still parts I'm working on. So I'm studying Gideon, Judges 6, 7, and 8, and I'm working on 8, and I felt the Holy Spirit say, you need to look at chapter 9. I was like, okay, but that's not, Gideon dies in chapter 8. I'm preaching on Gideon. Like, well, he dies, The Holy Spirit's like, look at chapter 9 of Judges. So I flipped to chapter 9. Here's what I read. In addition to all of these wars between the Hamas spirit and the Holy Spirit, it shows up after Gideon dies. Gideon is filled with the Holy Spirit, goes to war and wins, and then he dies, and then his son gets filled with the Hamas spirit and goes to war against God's people. Judges 9, Abimelech versus his brothers, Judges 9, 22 through 24. Abimelech, that's one of Gideon's sons, I'll explain this in a moment, ruled over Israel 3 years. And God sent an evil spirit, it's a demon, between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence, what's the word? Hamas. Done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal. We call him Gideon, his dad called him Jerubbaal. So that's his dad's name for him. Might come and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hand to kill his brothers. Here's the story. God told them, I'm going to give you the promised land, but you don't get a king right away. They wanted a king, but they weren't ready for a king. Until your heart surrenders to Jesus Christ as King of Kings, you're not ready for a king, because you're gonna come under bad leadership. So God raises up temporary leaders called judges. That's the whole book of Judges. And when Gideon wins the war, you're going to see this when we get into Judges 6, 7, and 8. He is a national hero. And so they want to make him king. And he says, nope, I can't be the king. God said it's not time for the king. Then Gideon, in his retirement, he gets a little self-indulgent. Takes a number of wives and concubines. The problem is always sexual. He has 70 sons. 70 sons. Right? Question, do you think there might be any conflict between the boys? Yeah, there's conflict. Because now you have sons that don't even know their father and they have a father wound, and just like in the days of Abraham, he's playing favorites, he's accepting some and rejecting others. And so he decides, I want to be the king. Now what's interesting about Abimelech's name, his name means my father is king. Probably not a good name, because there wasn't supposed to be a king. What he decides is, I'm so far down the chain of command because my father Gideon has so many wives and concubines, and I'm a son born to a concubine, not even a full wife, and my dad didn't even raise me, doesn't even know me. So what Abimelech decided was, I'm gonna slaughter all my brothers, and then I'll be the king. He murders 68 brothers. One brother runs for his life. He's the only one who survives. And then here in Judges 9, it tells us, how was Abimelech, who then ruled for 3 years, able to slaughter 68 brothers and take over the nation? Hamas. The same demon at work in the days of Noah, the days of Abraham, is still at work in Judges and the days of Gideon.
Howdy, Pastor Mark here. Thanks for viewing the clip. And if you'd like the entire sermon, we've got it ready to go.